off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have Let's Celebrate. Okay, so this story is one wild ride, and it is honestly actually pretty terrifying. One night, a young woman was coming home late after she had been out having a few alcoholic beverages. Her creepy neighbor unfortunately witnessed this and for some reason decided to head to her front door with her. Her birthday had recently passed, and so when her weird neighbor tried to give her a hug, she just assumed it was him trying to be nice, but things quickly got even more strange. As she was trying to get into her own home, he kept insisting he should come in and have a drink with her so that they could celebrate more appropriately. Absolutely not. This woman was thinking quick because she decided to tell him that she couldn't find her keys, and then she quickly pulled out her phone and she said she was calling someone who might have them. She was actually calling her cousin though, and she told him how scared she was. He lived close by, so he jumped out of bed and drove really quickly to come and pick her up. I wish this was the end of the story, but she explains that shortly after this creepy night, her neighbor actually ended up poisoning one of her dogs just out of pure pettiness. That is so insane. In our number 9 spot today, we have the upstairs neighbor. This story comes from someone who explains that they live in an apartment building. Their neighbors directly above them are the ones having some extremely fishy behavior. Apparently, it is not abnormal to hear this couple screaming and arguing with each other, which is quite a thing to have to get used to. But here's where things turn sinister. Our storyteller explains that she hasn't seen the wife for at least 3 months now, which obviously isn't normal. And now, suddenly, the husband says that he's going to Malaysia for a while, but our storyteller feels like he's going forever considering he is also selling his apartment. And we still don't know where the wife is. I'm hoping that maybe they just decided to separate since they were obviously arguing all the time and that nothing more sinister is going on here. If I was their neighbor, I'm sure my mind would definitely be racing as well though. In our number 8 spot today, we have this suspicious behavior. This story starts off with a description of the family next door. There are 3 of them, a husband, a wife, and their 2-year-old daughter. Apparently, the husband has always been super weird and gave off some bad feelings. He had a really expensive car, and apparently basically all he did was drive it and wash it. So, one day, the police came knocking on our storyteller's door, and the police explained that apparently the husband and wife next door had supposedly gotten a divorce, but they wanted to know if they happened to know the whereabouts of the wife and daughter because they could not locate them. Our storyteller didn't know anything about their whereabouts, but gave what info she did know, which was that she had a 2-year-old and that she was maybe pregnant and that she drove a white Jeep. After this police visit, they didn't hear anything else, but of course kept their eyes and ears peeled. A few months after the police visit, the creepy husband is outside cleaning his expensive car, and this is when our storyteller sees the wife's white Jeep in the garage of the house. If she had run off, why would she leave her car? The creepy husband saw our storyteller see the Jeep, and just a few short days later, he ended up selling it. This could all just be a coincidence, but it certainly is all a little suspicious. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Skull Stealer. This next story is one that our storyteller luckily didn't have to witness, but it definitely is still quite strange. Apparently, this neighbor man was out and about searching for gold one day, and on his way back, he ended up being pulled over for some reason. The police ended up searching this man's car when they found something I don't think anyone was expecting. They found a real human skull. Sinister or not, why would you ever have something like that in the back of your car? This guy's excuse is that he found it while he was out searching and thought it belonged to an Indigenous American. This man was most definitely arrested, and unfortunately, our storyteller doesn't know how the rest of this story panned out, but if it wasn't already clear, if you ever find a human skull, please don't take it home with you. In our number 6 spot today, we have Always Watching. This story is about the family that lived across the street from our storyteller when they were in high school. Our storyteller would walk to and from school every day, and while the mornings were normal, when he was coming home every day is when things got very weird. This family across the street would sit and stare out the window at this guy every single day as he returned from school. I couldn't imagine this happening to me once, let alone every single day, but that truly sounds like an absolute nightmare. To make things just a little more strange, it apparently wasn't uncommon for them to get phone calls from their scary neighbors' phone numbers, but when they answered, there just wasn't anyone on the other end. I feel like I would have immediately put my house up for sale or something because every night I would feel like I would need to sleep with one eye open. In our number 5 spot today, we have Stay Away. This story comes from someone who had some weird neighbors when they were around 9 or 10 years old. The people who actually lived next door were a middle-aged couple, and while they didn't have any kids of their own, they had 3 nieces who were around the same age as him, so they would play together often. One day, the couple invited our storyteller to church with them. There isn't necessarily anything inherently wrong with that, but what happens next is where things turned a little strange. This couple then proceeded to explain why this child should come to church with them, which already sounds creepy. They began to explain that the world was about to end and that they were preparing for that. These fully grown adults literally told the child that if he wanted to live, he should go to church with them. I have a strong feeling that if he wanted to live, the best thing to do would be to absolutely not go to church with them under any circumstances. Who knows what church they were going to, but there's no way it was good. In our number 4 spot today, we have This Dangerous Fence. This story comes from someone from a family with 4 siblings for a total of 5 kids. They were all pretty rambunctious and unfortunately had the pleasure of living next to a family with 2 children, both of which were, of course, very well behaved. Obviously, the neighbor dad didn't take too kindly to living next door to a bunch of wild children, considering he had 2 perfect little angels. But he certainly took things way too far. One day our storyteller was climbing around on the fence that separated the 2 properties, and this set off the neighbor dad. Instead of doing literally anything normal, he decided to do one of the most messed up things he could. He took those nails that are used for carpets to grip the flooring and stuck them in bars of wood, which he then placed on top of the fence. Keep in mind that our storyteller is around 5 years old at this time. So every time he would try to climb to the top, he would be stuck by a nail, which would then cause him to fall off. Luckily, our storyteller never got seriously injured or anything from this, but how weird is it for the neighbor dad to react like that? In our number 3 spot today, we have The Rose Garden. This story comes from someone's aunt and is about a neighbor she had in the 70s and 80s. This neighbor was harmless but had quite a creepy pastime. This neighbor volunteered at a blood bank, which is obviously great, but since the 70s and 80s were pretty much just a free-for-all, there was an insane blood bank rule that allowed this neighbor lady to be able to take home the bags of blood that were expired and would be thrown out. I truly cannot believe that was a thing, but I guess this lady was resourceful. She would take these bags of blood and then use them as fertilizer for her garden. Our storyteller's aunt explains that you would see her out there on her knees, digging around with a big floppy sun hat, just working human blood into the soil around her roses. They end off this story by explaining that all of the flowers in her garden were truly magnificent, and I guess maybe she really was onto something. In our number 2 spot today, we have The Next Door Dentist. This story comes from someone whose neighbor was a dentist, and he lived with his wife, and they apparently had one creepy child. Our storyteller explains that this weird family next door once absolutely freaked out on them for planting some flowers alongside their fence. They didn't go into detail about why, but the dentist family screamed as they said they didn't want anyone digging up their land. That's a reasonable request for sure, but also very, very suspicious. The dentist family ended up moving out 2 years after this strange incident, and our storyteller didn't really think much of them until 3 years after that. In an absolutely wild but not surprising turn of events, the dentist's dad ended up being arrested for kidnapping his patients. Our storyteller still has never had confirmation, but truly believes that there are still bodies located down there. In our number 1 spot today, we have Peeping Tom. Okay, so this one is truly one of the creepiest things I have ever heard. This story comes from a man who lives with his wife, and they have a downstairs neighbor who is certainly something else. First, this creepy neighbor approaches the wife and says to her that he can hear her and her husband all the time, with a super creepy and sinister grin on his face, which is absolutely horrifying to even think of. This is already creepy, but this story unfortunately gets worse. One day the wife was painting the porch of the house and accidentally dropped a paintbrush. She bent down to pick it up and sadly had to see what no one should have to see. Through the slits in the deck, she saw this creepy neighbor's eyes staring up at her. Tell me why this creepy man was laying under the porch, staring up at her, being a weirdo peeping Tom. They have no idea how long he was there for, and honestly, they probably don't even want to know.
Now, starting us off with number 10 is the truth. Now this one's from a girl on Reddit who said she was named after her great aunt who died in a motorcycle accident a few years before she was born. She was told not to talk about her to her great grandma because the loss was just too much to handle and relive again, which was fair enough. No one wants to relive the death of their daughter. Now when the user was 24 years old, her great grandma passed away, and after the wake her great uncle got drunk and just starts exposing everyone. Now in casual passing he mentioned the great aunt's suicide, and the user was like, wait, what suicide? Grandma told me she had died in a motorcycle accident. And he replied saying, yeah, that was the cover story. She just didn't want to tell anyone the real reason she had to give a closed casket for her daughter's funeral. And at this point the whole truth and nothing but the truth had to be spilled because too much had already been said. Now apparently the great aunt was a lesbian in love with another girl from university, and they had made a plan to be together without their parents' knowledge. Now when the user's great grandmother figured out the plans, she sent the great aunt halfway across the country in order to separate the two. But the girls had a contingency plan if this were to happen, and of course they knew it would. They made a suicide pact. The great grandma's homophobia had caused two innocent girls to kill themselves, but she admitted she never forgave herself for it, and it haunted her till the day she died. The user was honestly shocked at all the lies she'd been told about the woman she was literally named after, and the fact that everyone just accepted this lie just because of the great grandma's shame. This whole story just pissed me off, but then again this whole list is gonna piss me off. Love is love! Love is love. But coming in at number 9 is the boyfriend. This one actually broke my heart and was shared by a Reddit user. Now she said her grandma grew up in Costa Rica in the 40s, and at the time her mother was dating a guy that just seemed off. The user's grandma and her sister hated him, but their mother insisted that he was a good guy and that he took care of them, so they kind of just shut up about it. But one night the guy decides that he's actually done being nice and ends up murdering the mother in her bed by beating her skull with a hammer. Blood is everywhere on the walls, the ceiling, soaking the mattress. Now the user's grandma and sister come home to the scene and their mum dead in bed, and the boyfriend obviously nowhere to be found. They called the police, who took the body away, did a cursory examination of the crime scene, and then left. Can you just get this? The police left these two 12 and 9-year-old girls in a house where their mother had just been murdered. But the even worse part was that they only had one bed in the house, and that was the blood-soaked mattress, and if they threw that away they'd have to sleep on the floor. So they decided to just flip the mattress over, but then the user's grandma just ended up getting drenched in all the blood the mattress had soaked up. At number 8 we have who are the parents. Now this one also comes from a girl on Reddit who said when she was 21 her older sister confessed she had been raped by a stranger when she was 17 years old. The user was shocked that she hadn't been told this before, since they came from a really big family and everyone just kind of knew everything. But then she got to thinking her older sister also happened to be 17 years older than her, and people always commented on how the siblings could be twins. And one time for a class the user was asking her mum questions about her birth story, but she just couldn't remember the answers for most of the questions, like who was in the room at the time, when was she born, she just didn't know. To make matters more complicated, the parents were very religious and would never have condoned an abortion, so the secret here is that the user is adamant that she is the product of her sister's rape and that her grandparents have been pretending to be her real parents this whole time. Can you just imagine if your sister was your real mum this whole time? The user actually never had the guts to ask her sister about it, since if it wasn't true then she just made this whole traumatic rape story about herself, which is just very narcissistic. Honestly, if that was me I would have to ask. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't ask, but then if it wasn't true I would just disown myself and just leave. Now at number 6 is the uncle. Honestly I read a lot of stories for this video and I feel like a running theme in all of them was just evil uncles, which is just weird because I feel like uncles are usually just always so fun and nice, but clearly they are not. Now this one's from Reddit user GarbageCat88 who said their great aunt fell into a current at Niagara Falls and then got swept over the falls and ended up dying. Now most people ruled it out as an accidental death, but everyone in their family begged to differ. They believed the great aunt was actually pushed into the water by her alcoholic abusive husband. Now the user's grandma told them that way back in the day domestic abuse was seen as taboo and shameful, and so the whole thing was just kind of swept under the rug until the husband got remarried. The great uncle was very quickly arrested after his second marriage for nearly beating his wife to death. Dude, what is your issue? Go to rehab, buy a punching bag, and if neither of those things solve your issues then don't get married. plain and simple. So this Reddit user said that as their granddad got older, the user and their mum would look after him. Now the grandpa had dementia, but he would share stories from his life, from the war, from his youth, and so forth. Now one day he started telling them about his wife. He had liked her from before he went off to fight during World War II, but never really acted on it since he was poor and didn't think he was worthy to marry her. Now that's why he even enlisted, because he wanted to become respectable, but while he was away, their grandma ended up getting married to someone her parents approved of. But her first husband was horrible. He'd beat her, verbally abuse her, and even make her sleep in the barn outside in the cold. Now the only reason she didn't divorce him is because it just wasn't the done thing at the time. It was looked down upon, as you guys probably know. But when the grandpa finally came back from war, he was told she was married, that he could go visit her, and so he did, just to say hello, old flame, old fling, you know how it is. When he got there, he found her beaten and bloody and broken and took her to a doctor and convinced her to divorce the man and get out of that situation. She did, and then they got married a year later, but the ex-husband would continuously show up and harass her. Now the grandpa had always said the ex ended up moving away, but in a lucid moment recalling the story, he said this: "I hated him for what he'd done to her. I knew he'd never leave her alone. I made sure he'd never bother her or any woman again." So he basically just confessed to killing this man in the 40s in the Midwest, and not just that, he got away with it too. At number 4 is the video game break. Now you know when you've just been playing a PlayStation game for like 3 hours straight and you're just not getting anywhere and you're like, you know what, okay, I can quickly pause this, get a drink, get a snack right about now, you know how it is. Now that's an expected video game break, whereas this one is the farthest thing from it. Now this one came from an anonymous person who said their grandma was watching them play video games when all of a sudden she made a startling confession. She shared that when she was super young, she snuck out of their house late at night, and a man who lived on her street ended up taking her to his basement and raping her. She ended up getting pregnant, and after she gave birth, her mum and doctor took the baby away and smothered it to death. And she didn't even have a choice in the matter. The person had no idea what to say to this unprovoked confession, so they just hugged her and apologized on many people's behalf, but their grandma had closed off again by then and just said she didn't want to talk about it anymore, she just had to get it off her chest. There's so many stories of this that I read, and I'm just like, my heart goes out to all these people that such horrible things happen to you guys. Now filling our number 3 slot is the disappearing act. This one kind of made me laugh a bit. Like, I know it's not funny, but this aunt is just on another level of that I just want to attain at one point in my life. So an anonymous person shared that they have an aunt that literally disappeared off the face of the earth. It was the 40s or 50s in Portland, and she was about 20 something at the time. But nothing was wrong. She didn't have a problematic life, she was happy, she had a job, didn't have any family problems, but one day she just never came back from work. But also I just want to add that just because nothing seems wrong with her or her life on the outside doesn't mean she was happy on the inside. I mean, you never really know what people are going through, truly, so just want to throw that out there. Anyway, her family had no clue what happened or where she went, and they assumed she got kidnapped or was killed or just died somewhere. That was literally in the story, that she just died somewhere. How casual is that? Anyway, 5 years later, the aunt's brother is in Chicago for a business trip, and while walking down a street, he sees his sister. He calls out her name to make sure it's her, and she turns around and he's like, what the hell? Before bombarding her with a bunch of questions, which she obviously dodges. To clear the air, she invites him to her apartment, promising to explain everything. They reach the apartment, and before they get started, she says she really needs to buy some cigarettes from across the street because this was all a massive shock for her as well. He lets her go, and then again, she never bloody comes back. Like, what? Like, don't let her go anywhere alone if she has a history of pulling this crap, dude. Like, you had one job to not let her out of your sight, and that's exactly what you did. Chaperone her to the cigarette shop. You don't let her go alone. No. Now at number 2 is the drugs. And this just pissed me off so much I can't even tell you. Now this Reddit user shared that he found out that his dad used to drug his mum for years while they were married and then proceeded to rape her when she passed out. Now as soon as the user found that out, he helped his mum divorce him, and now the family has no relationship with the dad whatsoever. But it gets worse. While the user was dating his now wife, she once had some drinks with his dad and just was not waking up. Now she had just turned 21 at the time, so the user just assumed she couldn't handle her alcohol, but after years of knowing her, he realized she can handle her drink very well, and she's never been unwakeable. So the user is damn sure his dad drugged his wife and maybe raped her, but he has no proof. This whole story just made me absolutely sick to my stomach. Finally, at number 1 is the secret family. This one blew my mind, but it's actually not as uncommon as you'd think. So this story was shared by an anonymous girl who has 2 brothers and parents who have been married for over 35 years. Now remember that detail. Now one year over Christmas, she was doing some family research and found that her dad's name brought up birth results for 2 other people other than her and her siblings. Now the births were registered to the north of England, which was a red flag straight away because her dad used to work in that area for 5 years 20 years prior. So keep in mind, their parents were married by that point. He would go up there for 2 weeks, then be home for 2 weeks, and so forth. Now the girls did some more digging and found the 2 kids on Facebook, and they were now grown women, and their last names were also her dad's last name. Instead of contacting them, since she assumed they didn't know either, she found and contacted their mum. She posed as her dad's relative, and the woman confirmed her dad was the father of her kids and even sent photocopies of their birth certificates. Now the girl ends up calling the woman and confessing she's his daughter as well and had no idea about any of this, and the woman obviously breaks down crying. She shared that they had met in a pub and her dad had told her that he was single, and a few months later they were expecting their first child, and a year later the second. She thought he went back to Wales every 2 weeks for work, but he would call every other day from a phone box because apparently he didn't own a landline. Already shady, so many red flags. Who doesn't own a landline? Come on now. And one day he went back to Wales for work and just straight up never came back. The woman tried to contact the company he worked for, but his contract was up so he didn't work there anymore, and since he had lied about where he lived in Wales, the woman couldn't find him either. So the girl's dad just left this woman with 2 kids and literally did the biggest case of boy ghosting I've ever seen. Like, I thought I got ghosted bad, like this is horrible. The girl didn't even have the heart to confront her dad or tell her mum about the other 2 kids. Oh my god, I don't even know what I would do if I found that out. First of all, I would tell everyone. Would I? That's a secret that would ruin a family for sure.
Starting off this dark list, and at number 10 we have the secret farmhouse. A 25-year-old man escaped from a farmhouse and ran to the nearest public place, which happened to be a bar. He guzzled down 5 beers, and then he asked the bartender for help. He told him that he hasn't been outside for 9 years, and he's not the only one. Dutch police were called to the scene where they found a secret staircase behind a cupboard that led them down to the basement. Inside this secret room, they found a man and his 6 children living inside of a small confined space. Some of these kids had no idea that the other people existed. They thought that they were the only ones left on Earth, and they were waiting for the world to end. But as it turns out, someone in their family was keeping them locked up in this secret farmhouse for 9 years. Is this real life right now? The police were unable to find their mother, and they suspect that she was either the one that did this or that she is dead somewhere. An unknown uncle in prison is at number 9. This scary family secret comes from Reddit. Apparently this person had an uncle in prison, but no one in her family ever told her what he was serving time for. The family never talked about him, and if he was brought up in conversation, everyone would just simply change the topic. But one night, she was watching a TV documentary about horrific crimes that happened in Perth, Australia. And guess what? One of them was about David and Catherine Burney and how they brutally murdered a call girl. Well, as it turns out, this guy had the exact same name as her uncle in prison. Could this be the same guy? Could this be your uncle? Well, she turned to her mom, who said, so I guess you could put the 2 together. Well, I guess that's one way to find out that you have an uncle who murdered someone. Not the best way of finding out, but yeah. The murderous couple is in at number 8. Gerald and Alice Uden appear to be the most wholesome couple. They regularly attended church and they seem to be super nice, genuine, they're very generous people. Well, don't be fooled by them because both of them were hiding their own deep, dark secret for decades. Apparently they were both married to other people they met before. Alice shot her husband in the head and then decided to hide his body in a gold mine. Whereas Gerald confessed to shooting his ex-wife. I mean, is this real life right now? What are the odds of these 2 people finding each other? Did they meet at a killed my spouse group meeting, or maybe they swiped right on the kill me app or I've killed before app? It's also crazy how many years went by before they were finally caught by the police. This story is absolutely insane. Number 5, we have a crazy story about a girl who was raised by a man who killed her parents. Victoria Montenegro thought that her adoptive parents were kind and generous people who took her in after her real parents were killed in a shootout in Buenos Aires in 1976. Well, as it turns out, that was a complete lie. When she turned 24 years old, she discovered that the couple who raised her was part of the military regime responsible for her parents' disappearance. Her birth parents were actually abducted, abused, and assassinated by this group when she was only 4 months old. So her adoptive father took this opportunity to falsify her documents, hide her identity, and raise her as his own. This is just so messed up, so twisted. All of these years, she was being raised by a family that actually killed her parents and stole her identity. A serial killer in hiding brings us to number 4. Back in 1971, 13-year-old Charlie Brandt went into a full homicidal rampage. Without any warning, he shot his father in the back and then shot his pregnant mother while she was in the bath. He went to kill his other sister, but luckily his gun jammed. His father barely survived the shooting, but his mother wasn't so lucky. But because of his age, prosecutors never charged him with his mother's death. He was able to walk free and live a normal life. His family never brought up that night ever again, and he just went on as nothing ever happened. Well, in 2004, Brandt went on to brutally stab his wife 7 times in the chest. Afterwards, he committed suicide. It's crazy because no one knew that he had serial killer tendencies except for his family, who kept his secret after all of these years.